The Lord excused the saints in Missouri for not completing the temple in Jackson County, but like the Israelites of Haggai chapter 1, the saints were cursed for failing to complete the house of the Lord at Nauvoo. They rejected God and His ways in favor of men and their polygamy. William Clayton stated that Joseph spake on the importance of building the Nauvoo house, stressing that the time had come to build it, and the church must either do it or suffer the condemnation of not fulfilling the commandments of God. William Clayton Journal, 1842 through 46. Neither the Nauvoo house nor the temple were ever completed, for leaders had other priorities. The saints were thus rejected as a church with their dead. As God said, led by Young in the secret chamber, the cursing of the Brighamite faction of the church came because of idolatry, polygamy, and other sins, including priestcraft and murder. See the sins listed in 3 Nephi chapter 16 verse 10 and chapter 30 verse 2. Many wonderful, innocent people, good Latter-day Saints, suffered because of the sins of those leading them. Rather than focusing on the living God, His name, and His house, leaders, and thus the people, like the Israelites under Zerubbabel, Haggai chapter 1 verse 7 through 11, became focused on other things. The secret chamber did finish and dedicate a Masonic lodge before Joseph was murdered. Young, Kimball, and other brothers in Freemasonry put new things in place inside the Nauvoo Masonic Temple. Though this building wasn't fully completed, leaders were successful in changing the everlasting covenant, which was to do God's will, to a covenant tied to plural marriage. Lorenzo Snow took advantage of it and had 4 wives sealed to him in one day inside the structure. Following the murders of the Smith brothers, Young, Kimball, Richards, and Taylor built mansions for themselves with the tithing funds of the struggling saints. This too is another Young legacy, comfort and honors for those at the top, just like King Noah and his replacement priests. Many suffering saints coming to Nauvoo from Europe had little by comparison. They crossed the plains in 1847 with all they had on one handcart. In Luke chapter 19 verse 46, our Lord said He wanted His house to be a house of prayer, not a den of thieves. The Lord's command to build a house 2 times to His name, used 9 times, is found in Doctrine and Covenants section 124. He provided clear parameters for how this was to proceed. Following a rejection of Him and the fullness, a cursing followed that has continued for 4 generations, a natural result of the actions of wolves among the sheep. See 3 Nephi chapter 16 verse 10 and chapter 30 verse 2. God gave the Nauvoo saints a second chance after the rejection of His fullness earlier at Kirtland. He, in waiting with arms stretched out still. Reread in just 8 of the many verses of Doctrine and Covenants section 124. For there is not place found on earth that He may come to and restore again that which was lost unto you, or which He hath taken away, even the fullness of the priesthood. But I command you, all ye my saints, to build a house unto me, and I grant unto you a sufficient time to build a house unto me. And during this time your baptism shall be acceptable unto me. But behold, at the end of this appointment, your baptisms for your dead shall not be acceptable unto me. And if you do not these things at the end of the appointment, ye shall be rejected as a church with your dead, saith the Lord your God. If you will labor with all your might, I will consecrate that spot that it shall be made holy. And if my people will hearken unto my voice, and unto the voice of my servants, Joseph and Hiram Smith, whom I have appointed, to lead my people, behold, verily I say unto you, they shall not be moved out of their place. And it shall come to pass that if you build a house unto my name, and do not do the things that I say, I will not perform the oath which I make unto you, neither fulfill the promises which ye expect at my hands, saith the Lord. For instead of blessings, ye by your own works bring cursings, wrath, indignation, and judgments upon your own heads, by your follies, and by all your abominations, which you practice before me. And again, I command you again to build a house to my name, that you may prove yourselves unto me that ye are faithful in all things whatsoever I command you. that I may bless you and crown you with honor, immortality, and eternal life. Following the church conference in 1845, in which Brigham and Heber said the Gentiles were being cut off by God for their supposed murder of the Smiths, the Josephite detractors of Brigham and his new order of things believed they, the Brighamites, were the ones being cut off by God. Joseph Smith III, James Strang, Lyman White, Alpheus Cutler, and Charles B. Thompson all made statements accusing the Brighamite faction of the church of being rejected by God with their dead because of Young's polygamy and new doctrines like his blood atonement and Adam God theory. They also pointed to the fact that the Nauvoo temple had never been finished. Brigham Young made 4 statements clearly showing that he knew the Nauvoo temple was never completed. In Journal of Discourses 442, he says,
"Here let me ask the old saints a question. Have you ever seen a temple finished since the church commenced? You have not."
In Journal of Discourses 18:303 through 04,
"We reared up a temple in Kirtland, but we had no basement in it, nor a font, nor preparations to give endowments for the living or the dead. It is true we left brethren there with instructions to finish it, the Nauvoo temple, and they got it nearly completed before it was burned, but the saints did not enjoy it. I have been spending the winter in St. George. Our temple there is finished, which is the first completed temple built in the name of the Most High, in which the ordinances for the living and the dead can be performed, since the one built by Solomon in the land of Jerusalem, that we have any knowledge of."
Joseph originally envisioned a house of the Lord raised up to the living God. In 1846, just prior to departure of the Brighamite saints from Nauvoo, thousands of ordinances were performed in the Nauvoo Masonic Temple. Many featured multiple wives being sealed to a single man. Half the population following Young then left for the parched, salty land west. Many of those coming to Utah in the handcart companies and wagon trains were met by those leaving the valley. Those Brigham Young called dissenters or apostates. The Salt Lake Valley was supposed to be a spiritual utopia. The Weekly California Express in Marysville, California announced, "Many dissatisfied persons are leaving the country, and it is estimated that Brigham has lost not less than 5,000 followers. A general stampede seems to have seized the sojourners, and they are leaving the territory in all directions." Salt Lake Correspondence, Weekly California Express, August 6, 1859. Theirs is an untold story. They left Brigham's new kingdom because of fear, control, polygamy, poverty, and general disillusionment with Young and other things. Many enthusiastic saints, some 40% of the saints, had deeded their property to the church, all under the direction of Brigham Young and part of Temple Ols. It wasn't enough though. On January 20th, 1854, he convinced the territorial legislature to enact a bill that empowered probate judges to seize property left by any deceased or abscondent persons, and to give it to the PEF, Perpetual Immigrating Fund. John Hyde, an early European convert and handcart survivor, wrote that this new law was all about control. He said, "The object of this policy at the 1854 conference was to prevent Gentiles from purchasing any property without ecclesiastical sanction, to hinder departing apostates from taking any property from the territory, to make it the interest of every man to be submissive, and thus to more completely rule the people. Men love riches and can't leave without means. Now if you tie up the calf, the cow will stay." Quote of John Hyde by Mary Powell Sabin, Autobiography, 1926. As early as March 27, 1853, Brigham Young ordered those unhappy in Utah to leave. He stated,
"You nasty apostates, clear out. The moment a person decides to leave this people, he is cut off from every object that is durable for time and eternity. Every possession and object of affection will be taken from those who forsake his version of the truth, and their identity and existence will eventually cease."
Journal of Discourses. Fear tied to Young's blood atonement doctrine and how it was carried out became one of many tools he used to control the saints in his new kingdom. Blood atonement had close ties to the secret blood oaths made in Young's modified temple endowment. The first of 3 penalties tied to breaking this oath was slitting the throat. Those who knew the mysteries, the secrets of the Nauvoo endowment, were particularly suspect. Some knew that leaving Young's kingdom put them in peril. According to Hicks, it was during Young's 1856 through 57 Reformation movement that the doctrine known as blood atonement was first preached in Utah Valley by Brigham's older brother John. Hicks stated,
John Young said, there were hypocrites in Zion, and that they were not fit to live, and the time had come that their blood would have to be shed to save them. If you should find your fathers or your mothers by the wayside with their throats cut as a sign, go on about your business and say nothing about it, for it would be all right. Zion must be purified.
History of George A. Hicks, 1878. Kent V. Marvin, Mary Ann Lovelace, and Karen Kenshin in Will Bagley, One Long Funeral March. This great wickedness points back to Cain's oath. It is the mark of Cain, the mark of the beast. Strong's Concordance unites the word mark with sign, token, and oath, or oath. The oath Cain made with Satan and evil men. The inflammatory language directed to those who would not obey church leaders by the Young brothers and some stake presidents and bishops led to a number of murders in Utah, like the Potter Parish murders in Springville in 1857. Various members of the parish and Potter families were outspoken about the abuses they saw in Utah and wanted to leave. Just before their departure, 3 of the men were murdered. One had his throat cut, the other 2 were shot. One escaped to tell about it. The niece of William Parrish, the older man who had his throat cut, said that the people who left Utah were mostly a good people, honest and sincere in their religion, until they saw the wickedness that was being practiced by leaders. Many knew nothing of polygamy until they came there and saw it practiced. And when they were there was no way for them to get away. They were too poor, and they must obey the laws of the church and do as they were told and ask no questions. Keir Parrish, Memoir. She moved to San Bernardino after the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Addressing blood atonement, Brigham Young stated,
I could refer you to plenty of instances where men have been righteously slain in order to atone for their sins. I have seen scores and hundreds of people for whom there would have been a chance in the last resurrection if their lives had been taken and their blood spilled on the ground as a smoking incense to the Almighty, but who are now angels to the devil. I have known a great many men who left this church for whom there is no chance whatever for exaltation. But if their blood had been spilled, it would have been better for them. The wickedness and ignorance of the nations forbids this principle being in full force, but the time will come when the law of God will be in full force. All mankind love themselves, and let these principles be known by an individual as he would be glad to have his blood shed. That would be loving themselves even unto an eternal exaltation. Will you love your brothers and sisters likewise when they have committed a sin that cannot be atoned for without the shedding of their blood? Will you love that man or a woman well enough to shed their blood? This is loving our neighbors as ourselves. If he needs help, help him. And if he wants salvation, and it is necessary to spill his blood on the earth in order that he may be saved, spill it. Any of you who understand the principles of eternity, if you have sinned a sin requiring the shedding of blood, except the sin be unto death, would not be satisfied nor rest until your blood should be spilled, that you might gain that salvation you desire. That is the way to love mankind.
Deseret News, February 18, 1857, Journal of Discourses. Stephen Forsdick, an early handcart company survivor, mentioned the danger of breaking his endowment covenants twice in his journal. At that time, the temple in Utah had not been built, but all the secret work was done in the endowment house in Salt Lake City, with oaths and vows of secrecy. They had Young's destroying angels to enforce the penalty for violating such oaths. Stephen Forsdick, Autobiography. John Hyde, and another handcart survivor, stated, remembering that Margetts and Cowley were both covenant-breaking apostates, that they were returning to their native country, that they could make many terrible disclosures and do Young's Mormonism much injury in England, that it was Mormon law that they should die, and Mormon interest to kill them. He added, some of the leading spirits of that band, the Danites, are still in Salt Lake City, although they do not maintain their organization, being generally merged into Brigham's lifeguards. Yet without the same name, they have performed the same deeds. They never threaten what they will not perform, and fear of risking the penalty withholds many from apostasy. John Hyde Jr., Mormonism. Charles Derry, a stalwart Latter-day Saint from England, stated that, "There were oaths to take that I could not conscientiously subscribe to. I know that polygamy, blood atonement, and their oppressing system of tithing, together with the necessity of honoring the file leaders as the Lord's anointed, were the burden of their teaching." Autobiography of Elder Charles Derry. Summarizing the reasons why thousands left Utah Territory in the late 1850s, author Polly Aird stated that they included the demands of obedience, the false tenet and practice of polygamy, the excesses of the Reformation and perceived failure of Brigham Young and other church leaders to set and live up to a high moral standard, and the insidious atmosphere of fear. It is not surprising that some took the road out of Zion. See Polly Aird, "You Nasty Apostates, Clear Out." Reasons for disaffection in the late 1850s. Joseph and the saints sacrificed much at Kirtland. They were rewarded with a great outpouring of the Lord's Spirit at the dedication of the house of the Lord at Kirtland. God accepted this house. It was built to His name. He visited Joseph and Oliver inside it a week after its dedication, doing so on Sunday, April 3rd, the day of the Lord's resurrection 2,000 years earlier. The house at Kirtland remains standing, a monument to a dedicated people and their love for God. The building at Nauvoo was cursed, as were the saints for 4 generations from Joseph's murder. We are at the end of this cursing, the one addressed in Doctrine and Covenants section 124, verses 32, 46 through 48, and Doctrine and Covenants section 84, verses 49 through 58. The Nauvoo Masonic Temple was destroyed in this curse. Early on, its roof caught on fire in February 1846. Later, its tower was struck by lightning in September of 1848. 1 month later, an arsonist, most likely under Brigham Young's own orders, then torched the structure. 2 years later, a tornado cast down 3 of its walls. And finally, in 1865, the last wall standing was torn down by Nauvoo residents. The stones were then used for other purposes, just like those of Solomon's Temple and Herod's Temple in Jerusalem. All 3 structures were destroyed because of the idolatry and other sins among the people. This is documented by the Lord in 3 Nephi chapter 16 verse 10, 21:19, and 30 verses 2. It was a sad ending to the house Joseph envisioned as the bride of the Lamb in JST Revelation 12. Its destruction is perhaps better illustrated by the unfaithful bride of Isaiah chapter 54. Brigham Young tried to sell this structure 13 different times without success. He did not have clear legal title to it as the trustee in trust, simply because he was not a legitimate successor via bloodline to the prophet Joseph, as confirmed in a number of ways, including the judge's verdict in the Temple Lot case. If Young couldn't have the money tied to its sale, then neither would anyone else. And he certainly didn't want it to fall into the hands of James Strang, his primary opponent to lead the church from 1846 to 48. Evidence clearly shows that Young torched the building. It was defiled long before he burned it down. Fighting broke out inside the temple when James Strang sent his representative to Nauvoo to raise supporters for him as a possible successor to Joseph. Young sent his supporters to stop the speech, using Chief of Police Hosea Stout, Young's bodyguard and enforcer, to do it. Earlier, Stout struck a man with a rock inside the temple, nearly killing him, as he was a suspected spy, a supporter for someone other than Young, perhaps Strang. U.S. Marshals also entered the temple, including its top floor where the endowment rituals were conducted, to arrest Young and others of the 12. They were suspected of counterfeiting. Perhaps most offensive to the Lord were the many polygamous marriages inside it, in rites falsely associated with Elijah's sealing power. Elijah used his God-given power to destroy Baal worshippers by fire from heaven in 1 Kings chapter 18. Baal worship involves sexual perversion and child sacrifice. Elijah's sealing power was ultimately tied to salvation in Christ, not the abomination of polygamy. Fire is coming again in our day to cleanse the earth. The bride of the Lamb will also be cleansed and prepared for her husband, or she shall not stand at that day. Ask to know how you can prepare.